Hey folks, I'm Bret Kinsella. This is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week at usually 11 a.m. on Thursdays. And we talk about the top generative AI news of the week. This week we've got things from Accenture, OpenAI, Stability AI, Instagram, really down the list as we typically do. And joining me to break it all down is my colleague, Eric Schwartz. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Hey, good. Excited to do this, I think possibly last of the year.
Not just possibly, absolutely the last year. It's been quite a year. And because it's been such a great year, we have a guest with us this week. Pete Erickson, how are you today?
Hey, great to be here with you all. Good morning.
All right. So Pete is the founder of Modev and has run the biggest voice and AI conference in the world, globally, we'll say, for the last several years. Now has a couple of new conferences focused specifically on generative AI, moving on from conversational AI and some of the other AI stuff that he's been doing, mobile development, all that stuff. And he's got some stuff coming up, and I'll let you do a quick promo in a little bit. But what I like to do at the top of the hour is I like just to get right into the news. And if anybody's out there joining us from LinkedIn Live or YouTube, just let us know you are here. Feel free to comment, but just give us a shout out. We're wrapping up the year here, and this will be pretty fun to do. So let's get into the first story. And this was a really interesting thing to hit just a couple of days ago. So Gemini is Google's follow-on to the Palm LLM. It is their premier model, and there's different levels. There's Gemini Pro, Gemini Ultra. Ultra is supposed to be the GPT-4 equivalent. Gemini Pro is supposed to be the GPT 3.5 equivalent. That's what runs on ChatGPT. And so 2 weeks ago, they announced it. Last week, they released it. And within that week, some researchers at Carnegie Mellon University said, hey, let's take a look at how well Gemini does versus GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, at least the Gemini Pro, which is available. Let's not just take their word for it. Let's see what we find. And what we find is that, I guess sort of the operative thing here is, we found that across all tasks, as of this writing, December 19, 2023, Gemini Pro's model achieved comparable but slightly inferior accuracy compared to the current version of OpenAI's GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is different than what Google reported. So Google said it was better than 3.5, but not quite as good as GPT-4. But the Ultra model is coming out next month, and that'll be better than GPT-4. So, Pete Erickson, what do you make of this?
Well, it's just part of this exciting race that we're in, right? And I think that we're going to be seeing this comparison going on across all the different LLMs, from now till this race is well run, right? And out of the gates, there's some really interesting. Sorry, I'm getting a call. I'm going to just delete that. There's some really interesting anecdotal things coming out as well. Christian, I believe Kammerman, was at Stability, founded at an AI, generative AI imaging startup. And he came to the conclusion that, GPT 4.0 was having some challenges. So he went back to GPT 3.5. We're going to see this with all of the models. Yes. And so when you take a snapshot in time, like they just did, you're going to see some interesting variables with regards to performance. That's the thing about, I think, all of these models is that they're going to evolve at different rates. And at any given snapshot in time, you're going to see variable results. And so I would say the thing is, it's a sprint and also a marathon. And these models are going to improve over time. But on any given day, there may be a really tough mile that they're going through.
Well, I will say, when you talk about sprints and marathons, there are the elite marathoners can run a mile in their marathon faster than I can run a mile. So, so that is exactly what we're talking about. What do you think about this, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there is the technical aspect of trying to quantify and measure how well these things perform, how well they perform in different terms. And as you pointed out in your post on NVIDIA, there's a couple of areas where there's just no response at all from Gemini, which sort of skews the result unless you remove those elements. But I think the other thing to consider is, as we've talked about before, is that Google, despite having so much of this kind of technology, was caught flat-footed sort of all year by OpenAI. and now they're ending the year with a headline that their brand new LLM that they're so proud of performs slightly worse than the GPT 3.5 that has been already supplanted in OpenAI. So the story behind it, which is obviously very important for things like selling the LLM and convincing enterprises to use it, is not a good it's not a good look for Google at this point, despite all of their big promises a few weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just go ahead, Pete.
I want to circle back because I just needed to find this. It's Christian Cantrell. He was former Stability. He has now founded. He is working on concept.art, but he says this. I think this is important. I finally run into a situation where the quality of GPT 3.5 Turbo isn't high enough, but the speed of GPT-4 negatively impacts the user experience too much. I'm going to use GPT-4 to generate hundreds of thousands of examples, which I will then use to train and fine-tune GPT 3.5. I think that kind of stuff and that kind of evidence that we're having people that are pushing the limits on these models is really interesting to follow. And like I said, at any given time on any given day, you're going to find this kind of evidence out there.
Yeah, and that is sort of state of the art right now. And so there's this trade-off between performance, latency, and cost. And if you look at something like GPT-4, particularly GPT-4 Turbo and the higher context windows, it's like super expensive. It's like 10 times more expensive than the other models. But this latency thing is a key factor, and a lot of people don't ever talk about that. GPT-4 is essentially non-usable for many applications just because of latency. Forget about cost. It's just too slow to generate anything you need very, very quickly. But let's talk about performance for just a minute and just like sort of break this out. I put up on the screen here the table that they showed. So the knowledge-based QA, that's MMLU. If people don't know this benchmark, it is widely used. It's one of the most widely used. It is essentially multidisciplinary, and so that's why it's like general knowledge. I will do the caveat that there are some issues with it. There are actually some things that are incorrect in MMLU, but overall, it's the most widely used. And what we're going to see here is that actually the Gemini Pro numbers that CMU found are much lower than what Google found, and that puts them behind GPT 3.5 Turbo as well as GPT-4. So, I think the first thing that we've all been looking at is the quality race. Can anybody be as good as OpenAI? And that's what everybody benchmarks against, whether it's Anthropic, which has really been the second best model so far. And so really what we want to look at is how does Gemini Pro compare to Anthropic? Because everybody's fighting for that second slot. And I think that's the most important thing. Now, from a benchmarking standpoint, we talked about Microsoft Phi. We've talked about Mistral. We've talked about all these different models that are coming out, Inflection AI. They all cherry pick which benchmarks they want to do. Just Luther AI alone, the Luther AI test harness, which is open and Hugging Face, has over 200 benchmarks that you could run, of which reasonably about 80 are pretty legitimate. And there's a variety of them, and you put them together, and it's like this basket of general purpose solutions. And so one of the things I've been doing a lot of work on is benchmarking. Like, how do you do this? Selecting the benchmark is as important as selecting the model. And so we'll bring this out. And I think what we're looking for is what is good enough quality for your use case. And so the next thing is, just because GPT 3.5 is better than Gemini Pro at MMLU does not mean it's going to be better for your use case, or does not mean it's going to be meaningfully different. Now, the pricing for those is exactly the same. The latency is probably comparable, but I don't have latency numbers on those. But those are the types of things that people have to think about. And I think about these public benchmarks. It's kind of like a scoring system that everybody does. It's like, here's my leaderboard. It's almost like the social proof and social media follower numbers. Like, do they really mean that much to me? It's in some ways it's that. So, but it is a good screening mechanism. If people aren't doing well, if the models don't do well in these general purpose benchmarks, unless you do a really extensive fine tuning, they're probably not going to be as good as some of the other models that do better. And so that's really where I want people to start to think about this.
I also think you bring up a really interesting point, Bret, in that you're describing a whole area of expertise that is a new career path for people to really understand these models, to understand benchmarking. I mean, it reminds me of, maybe the early web days and setting up different data models, and so that the database manager and the data engineer became new career paths for people. I think this is describing a whole area of expertise where you may be using different models and different LLMs for different use cases across an organization, and you're going to have an expertise group within an organization. Might even be a horizontal that really helps you define what it is you need for your use case. So I think people should pay attention. This is an exciting area, and if you can be an expert in this area, you're going to set yourself apart.
Yeah, and it's not just how they perform in the benchmarks, but it's like when you select a model, before you select the model, you have to select the benchmarks, both the public ones that are available, whether through Eleuther or Stanford Helm or any of those types of things, but also whatever custom version of those you're going to do, because you're going to do some additional testing for your own use case. So this is something that's going to be a big deal in 2024, 2025, because when you select an LLM, you're kind of married to it.
That's right. And I think this brings up another point I'd love to talk about, and that is that I believe there's a paradox right now in the IT world, and that is that while IT spending is up overall, I think anybody that sells AI products into the enterprise is having a very hard time. It's been a very long sales cycle period at the end of 2023. We certainly feel it because we talk to hundreds of AI vendors out there. So I think there's a paradox right now that there is a gold rush on one hand, and there's a ton of funding coming into the market, but IT organizations are having a very hard time making decisions because they're trying to make sure they make the right decisions. And if you're a conversational AI vendor and you've been in a 6 to 12 to 18 month sales cycle, and suddenly that's being slowed down because there's the arrival of new products, Gemini,
Yes.
and everything else, there's a real paradox right now that's happening. And I think that, I feel it. I don't know what you all think about it.
So you're saying like in some ways, like the speed of innovation is actually a detriment for adoption, because it's kind of like back in the day when like, do I buy this iPhone or do I wait 3 months until the Samsung Galaxy version is it's like twice as good, or do I just wait another 12 months and skip a cycle because I'm always going to be trying to play catch up. We saw this early days in the PCs. We saw this in mobile devices. And I think it's a really interesting insight. Maybe we're seeing that right now with LLMs, and that is yet another reason for people to delay.
Yeah, and I see it in the market. I know how long the sales cycles are for a lot of these AI vendors, and it has not gotten shorter. And it's because IT departments are having a hard time getting to an answer about which direction are we going to go. And should we be making this $1 million, $2 million, $5 million purchase right now on possibly old technology? And so like there's a really interesting paradox that's happening in the market right now. So anyway, my heart goes out to a lot of the vendors that are out there, because I know it's tough sledding, and in many regards it's a paradox because it's a very exciting market. There's a lot of funding moving into it. There's probably a lot more sales meetings and conversations that are happening because there's a need for more information. So, but it's an interesting paradox. My hope and my belief is that 2024 is going to start to see that ice break, and that, think of it like a fjord. The ice is going to break and it's going to move. But I feel like that's happened. I don't know what you both think about it.
I think it's 100% that, Eric. Any thoughts on this? Because I want to move on to the next thing, which is related to what you just said.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, as covering this all here with you, Bret, we've seen everyone is experimenting with everything, and the next step is figuring out, understanding now what works and figuring out how to improve it and make it, cheaper, faster, better.
Yeah, and I would say that people should be thinking about choosing their partner. Because whatever you implement next year, you're going to upgrade within 2 years. It's kind of like the old software upgrade cycle. And it's going to be easier to stay within the same model family, the same vendor, than to switch. Some people think you can switch. It's actually harder than you think to do that. But like, I want to build on what you just said. And I sort of move this other story up in the order, because this is about that whole idea of what's being sold in the market.
That was good.
And so if we think about it, Accenture, I don't know if you saw this article, but they did 300 million in generative AI projects. In fact, at the end of August 31st, which is the end of their fiscal year, so that was the 2023 fiscal year, they had done $300 million in business and 300 generative AI projects. That's what they listed. Now, they aren't all $1 million, but let's just say some are larger, some are smaller. In the first quarter of this year, they did $450 million in generative AI projects. And it's just accelerating. And McDonald's, they announced this big deal with McDonald's as well, where McDonald's is going to like automate a lot of the back of the restaurant stuff. But so it's as much as that seems, it's like in one quarter, you did 50% more than you did all last year. But there's a couple other things. There's macroeconomic headwinds, which is hurting Accenture's overall business. So they didn't really get a bump out of this, like, significant rise in generative AI revenue. I mean, like you think about it, $16 billion, $450 million isn't a lot, right? But they said it's also true. Julie Sweet, who's the CEO, said it's also true, like in terms of inhibiting generative AI adoption, the macroeconomic headwinds, because people are afraid of like investing in something that is viewed as discretionary. The next thing is lack of data readiness, which people just don't understand, that most of the data you want to use for your generative AI project probably is not ready to be used in that. Some of it might be, but a lot of it's probably not. And in fact, I think I was just looking at something. There's a couple different estimates. Accenture says 10% of companies are fully ready. Another study I saw was 13% of companies are fully ready, and maybe another third are partially ready. So like half are not ready, right? And so it's hard for them to move forward. And then this issue of governance and safety, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But those are sort of the three barriers to adoption, and why some of these sales cycles are, despite the enthusiasm, why some of these sales cycles are really long.
Yeah, I was going to say before you broke to that headline is that the consulting companies are doing very well right now in AI, because there's such a need for information and analysis. So the consulting companies are having a very good run. It's the product, it's the platforms, it's the SaaS platforms, the AI platforms that are having a harder go, just because it's like you said, only 13% of the market is actually ready to buy.
It's more data science. Like people think it's more data science work. Actually, to get the project done, it's actually more data engineering work than it is data science work.
Yeah, that's also, I think, why you're seeing some, and probably will see more investment in companies that are good at cleaning up, collating, and organizing data, and also that are built around governance for AI.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And by the way, I saw McDonald's in that headline. So we just, the chief data officer for McDonald's is going to be speaking at our CES.
Oh yeah, I want you to talk about that. So go for it.
Make sure. Yeah, so I've worked with CES for over a decade. I've been a content partner. What that means is we bring programming to CES. We're an official part of the program in the schedule. Our speakers are official CES speakers, and we produce a piece of content. This year we're calling the event BrandsGPT. And it's on January 9th, which is day one. It's from 1 to 5 p.m. And it's a look at how different brands are leveraging generative AI at this moment in time. And we're thrilled with the result of what we've been able to put together. We have, like I mentioned, the chief data officer, Michelle Gensel from McDonald's. But we also have Janine Heck, who's SVP of AI at Comcast. And they have been on the bleeding edge of this with their X1 remote. I don't know if anybody's experienced that, but it's been really good. And it's been like one of the best like voice interfaces. It doesn't talk back to you. You just talk into it, but it understands you. And also their AI engine recommends programming and all that stuff. So they've been really on the forefront of this. And now with, I'm excited to hear what Janine has to say about their incorporation now of large language models and GenAI into the Comcast AI platform. We also have Julie Towns, who's the VP of product at Pinterest and over their AI efforts. And as we know, Pinterest is a market leader in the space, and a ton of opportunities are I think on the horizon for them relative to AI, but we also have some really kind of fascinating other folks joining us. May Habib, who's the founder of Writer.com. They just raised $100 million. Yep. And they started out as really a kind of almost a marketing writing platform.
Yes.
However, they've really discovered that from a workflow standpoint inside enterprises, there is a ton of opportunity, right? With documentation and workflows, and I mean, you name it,
and
the amount of document.
And they do custom models as well, which I think is a little different than like Jasper or something like that. They'll not just give you like a regular one; they'll give you a custom model. And quick shout out to folks. Jeremiah Ouyang is joining us. Hey, Jeremiah. Oya Jackson has been in a lot of these recently. Thanks a lot for
Yeah. Our event is January 9th. Just want to make sure people know that. That's day one of CES. So it's in Las Vegas. We're going to be at the Venetian Hotel. We're on the 4th floor. You can easily get to the information about the event at our website, modev.com/CES. We'll take you there. But we're also an official program. So if you search in the program on the CES website for BrandsGPT, you'll find our sessions. Just a couple of other really interesting people that are joining us. We have the Acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su. She's going to be talking about workforce and the impact on workforce of AI. We have the president of the American Medical Association to talk about the positive impacts of AI on the healthcare system to alleviate doctor and nurse burnout and really solve some, there's a real crisis in medicine with burnout and mental health. So, and then the the Assistant Secretary of Science and Technology, Dmitry Kuznetsov, who's a fabulous visionary. He's written 4 papers recently on AI in the future. So we've got just a schedule. It's actually the best lineup we've ever had at CES. We're really excited about it. So yeah. And Bret, I mean, I don't know if you're going to be there, but we've worked with you there before. So are you planning to be in Vegas?
I'm actually
putting you on the spot, man. I'm putting you on the spot.
I had a conflict, but I might actually be able to do it. So that's what I'm working on right now, to see if I can come.
Well, you're always welcome.
I'm already registered as a media and stuff like that. But yeah, so yeah, everyone should go check that out. That's going to be pretty amazing. It's one of the reasons I wanted Pete on, because I know he's been talking to all these companies and has that event coming up, which I think for people who go into CES, you should definitely just go and attend this. And if you're not, it might be a reason for you to go. And I think from a generative AI standpoint, it's going to be the best programming there. There'll be a few other things that are going to be going on. There'll be a few booths, but just looking at what's happening there, you're going to have the most interesting panel of speakers out there. And I think also probably because of that, the best networking.
I want to give a shout out to Andy Hewells from Radius. She's been a great partner, as well as T. Hawkins. Behind the scenes, it takes a village to make these things work, and the two of them have just been outstanding to work with, and also our partners at Outright Agency have been fabulous. So I just want to make sure people, it's not just Pete, it's my team, it's our network.
Yeah, sure, I got it.
People like you, Bret, as well, that help make these things happen.
People should check that out. Okay, so let's get back to the news. And by the way, folks, if you have comments, questions, or let us know from a shout out standpoint that you're here in the audience, we'd love to say hi, or we'd love to hear what you think about this, or you have questions that you have around these. So we just did those are the top stories. We got a bunch of other stories now, but we want to move into funding fountain. So one of the segments we always do is what's going on in the money game in the space. And Eric, you had a story around Harvey, and we've talked about Harvey in the past. We've also talked a lot about Spellbook, and we've had the founder of Spellbook on a couple of times. What's going on with Harvey, and how is that different from what else is happening in the legal space with AI?
Yeah, so Harvey was a very relatively early startup in using OpenAI's originally GPT-3 technology to create a sort of assistant, originally for legal services, so for lawyers and people working at law firms, helping with research and editing and even composing a lot of the more sort of tedious content that's necessary for any legal profession. And they raised $5 million from led by OpenAI's own venture fund at the November last year, but now they raised $80 million, and they've expanded quite a lot, not just in terms of the company itself, but looking now beyond legal services into all professional services, so accounting and consulting, and really anything that involves the kind of fine detail or a lot of fine print that can be annoying and to take a long time to do, but can be put together very quickly by a computer if you feed it the right or an LLM if you feed it the right data. So yeah, they're on their way up, and they're getting investment from Kleiner Perkins. So some of the
Yes.
bigger blue chip areas. So it's I think something we're going to see a lot more of in terms of not just software, but specifically domain related software, generative AI software.
Kleiner Perkins, maybe the formerly blue chip.
That's true.
Base over the years. Yeah, and this is one of the things that like a lot of people thought legal wouldn't be a good place for LLMs because everyone's worried about hallucinations, confabulations. But in fact, anybody or any industry, any function that deals in a lot of words, LLMs are revolutionary. And so whether it's creation or review or summarization, there are lots of ways that it can be done, and it significantly improves the workflow and quality of what's being put out. And so that's why Spellbook has had 30,000 inquiries on their product. And I think last I checked, they were onboarding 100 law firms a day.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a week. Yeah, not a day. 100 law firms a week. But still, I mean, it's like there's pent-up demand. Anybody who has a lot of words is going to be big in this space.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Eric, you had another story about OpenAI's startup fund. What's going on there?
Yes. So, it's sort of been in the background since OpenAI became a well-known name, but they created a $100 million investment fund with Microsoft, and they've been looking at they've been investing relatively small amounts in startups, but also putting together these accelerator programs, or an accelerator program called Converge, and they've now the first one was successful enough that they're going ahead and pursuing a second one with about $10 million to invest in between 10 and 15 companies. So, it's in some ways it sounds like, just another accelerator for young startups. But when it's OpenAI putting it together and OpenAI backed by Microsoft, that means, that $10 million is really the tip of the iceberg. If you have a company that is seems to be going places, I mean, that's how they'll get connected to you. And then if they like what you're doing, suddenly those the Microsoft wallet opens and the OpenAI technology spout opens up, and you're potentially going to expand very quickly. So I suspect there'll be plenty of competition for those spots, despite the relatively small amount of investment available.
The validation's bigger than the dollars. Way for
yeah,
way
and the
more.
access
to
whatever OpenAI is working on next is going to be very valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too. The law firms is one of the areas you mentioned SaaS, and some of the companies, particularly I think in the CX space, customer support, where there's been a lot of activity. There's been a lot of activity for trials, but slow in terms of full adoption and integration. Legal profession is one of the exceptions there. There's been huge adoption very quickly, which I think has been fascinating. So let's move on to a different story here, and we're sort of getting into the product garden. So funding fountain waters the garden. So what's going on in there? And we had a fascinating story about Channel One. I don't know how many people saw Channel One. Jeremiah's in the audience. I know he posted about Channel One.
I love this story, and I would love to stay on, but I do have to break for my next call. So
that's right. You have to go.
Yeah, I had a hard stop. So I want to say thank you both for everything you've done for this industry this year. You've really done just so much to help move this industry along, and you've just stayed with it. So I look forward to seeing how much this grows in 2024. So thank you both, and thanks for having me on it. Thanks everyone out there. I look forward to seeing you at a future event.
Thanks, Pete. Everyone go to BrandsGPT if you can at CES.
Cheers.
All right. So Eric, the story about Channel One, I think, is really fascinating. So, essentially there's a couple different things that are going on here. So they're going to have avatars that are going to read you the news, right? And those news stories are going to be created by LLMs, basically summarizing existing news from other sources. And it'll also be, it's designed as like a kind of like an online television station, right? And then the virtual humans will like read the story. It's just like a newscaster reads off of a teleprompter. And they're going to also have feeds of live video footage and those types of things. They've got other angles where they'll translate it, they say, into any language but there's going to be several languages to start that you'll be able to watch news from all over the world. And one of the things they're doing with the technology is that because these are virtual humans, they can just do the lip movements so it's in your native language. But they also showed an example of taking a French news coverage and then translating it into English or into another language so that people can even hear from the original source content. And it's not just like overdubbing, like they actually, you can do this now where you manipulate the video so it actually looks like the mouth movements and facial movements are all about, speaking in that native language. So I think this is really interesting. And I'll just like bring one more thing before I bring you in on this, Eric. Everyone talks about this idea of automation, like we're going to automate productivity. Everything's a lot faster. But they're not talking necessarily about personalization. And Channel One is talking about personalization and this idea of mass personalization, and that they're going to have 500 to 1,000 segments per day. We'll talk about whether that is what type of personalization that is. But this idea that you will have your own news feed. It won't just be like going somewhere and like seeing what was curated for you. And just one last point, Jeremiah said, yes, it's going to be from qualified news. Like the sourcing that they're going to do is going to be from existing news organizations. So they talked about potentially doing net new reporting, but that's clearly not what's happening in the beginning. In the beginning, what they're going to do is they're just going to repackage it. So what did you make of this?
Yeah, I think sometimes these terms are used a little fast and loose. I mean, it's not automation. It's some of it are things that have existed for a long time in terms of at least limited summarization of news. I mean, you've been able to ask for the news from voice assistants for a while, and sometimes it is, if not automated summarization, then at least partially computer generated summarization. But now it sort of takes it from just a clip of a larger news piece to a full-on, as you said, repackaging, turning it into a broadcast, putting together visuals to go with it, which is its own level of potential problems and also potential success if it's depending on how well personalized it is. But I think it's not the idea of being able to have your news show be all the things that you are interested in or are relevant to you without having to either skip past or ignore parts that are just not of interest to you is certainly valuable, as is the translation aspect. But I think I suspect what will happen is that there's going to be a lot of partnerships with USA Today or the AP where there will be a collaboration on how those LLMs work, but then filtered through Channel One's visuals and audio.
And I think one of the things they said is like the app's not even going to be out for months. I think one of the reasons they announced now is because they have to get the partnerships in place in order for this to work. And this was probably the splashiest way to do it. Also, I think they're probably in a fundraising cycle or will be shortly in order to do this. I will say that, sort of going back to comments that we've had in the past around AI generated news or AI transformed news, I think there is this question about who's going to create the original content. And there are, like, I sort of understand the news business, right? And I think, like, I understand that there are like people and skills and craft involved in this. But okay, so some of these skills are going to be automated based on what generative AI can do. Aside from that, we still need people to do original reporting. And one of the things I'm thinking, it's like, this might not be that different from what happened with online news publishing. We all see this, right? It's very rare that you see a news story outside of sort of the major media players that actually has any type of original reporting. It's usually online. It's people who are just repackaging what the major news organizations are doing. So, that's where blogs started. That's what most online publications, I would say, primarily do. So what are your thoughts on that? What is this going to do? And it could be that it doesn't destroy news. It could be that like the companies that actually do the original reporting actually become more valuable all of a sudden.
Yeah, I have there's a utopian image in my mind where reporters are going out doing original reporting, putting together original reports, and then what the AI does is find everything that might be related to it and essentially make like the little fact boxes and the little like if you want to learn more, or giving insight and obviously links to previous reporting, have all of that be done by AI, and even potentially some of the visual elements, or certainly the publicizing and pushing out the stuff. If all of that could be done by AI and the reporters could focus on the original reporting, that would be the utopian vision. The nightmare vision is that the rich, the companies and the people who own the mass media are like, well, in that case, we'll just take everything given to us by companies, governments, or whoever, and feed that into the AI, and then we don't need any reporting, because why would those people lie to us when they tell us what's going on with them? And that's the darkest version of it. But I suspect at least it'll be somewhere in the middle. But my dream is definitely that it's the original reporting that is valued, and reporters like myself or all the people I went to journalism school with can still do what we do without having to focus on all the other bits that are necessary in the modern media environment, but are not necessarily what we want to do.
New distribution and packaging through these types of things. Jeremiah brings up a good point. And this was one of the key focuses of that Synthedia article I did. The mainstream was also scared of citizen reporting when blogs and social networks and live streaming came out. And like, think about us. We're alternative media. We're independent media. Like, we're not listed on a stock exchange, right? So we actually do the original reporting that other people don't do, because we actually understand the technology and we talk to these people every day, as opposed to like the beat reporters who like cover 9 or 12 different technologies given any given day. But Jeremiah brings this up, and like when USA Today first came out, it was derided as McPaper, low quality, the dumbing down of America. When CNN first came out, people were like, "Oh, this is terrible." It's like you can't just report on something immediately. It needs to be filtered, through an offered perspective. And I think the answer is generally both. Like, we want both types of things. So I think things like this are going to succeed. I'm not sure Channel One will succeed. And so that's really what I would say, because I think like there are other solutions, whether it be Flipboard or Smart News or those types of things have come out and they've done okay. Right. And Flipboard, you could say, has done really well because it's got over 100 million monthly active users, and it's like sort of transformed a bit over time. But, frankly, it's not, all it's doing is it's just, giving you stuff that's already out there. It's not doing anything original. It's just repackaging and that type of thing. And so in terms of like new news organizations, the track record's not very good. So I would say that probabilistically, it's very low likelihood this is going to be successful. But I think someone in this category will, and whoever is the first to scale is going to do it. And actually, Channel One has the right idea that I think personalization will be the differentiation.
Yeah, it's sort of the sub-stacking of this other sort of news, where it's you follow the Substack because someone whose point of view you're interested in is worth following or worth subscribing to their newsletter. And similarly, it'll be, you're subscribing to all these, channels that are essentially your personalized news packages. But the thing that will draw people in will be, again, a particular point of view, a particular experience, or whatever it is that makes it more than just a bullet point list of facts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like attribution is key here, because AI could scrape your live session, distribute original content, your thoughts, commentary without credit. And in fact, this happens today. It's happened to VoiceBot. It happens to The Verge. It happens to TechCrunch all the time. You'll see it's just like whatever SEO, is most successful. Very often you just look at it, and we look at this for source information. Sometimes when we're doing stories, we say, hey, listen, there's some other reporting over here. And we look down and you look at it, it's just like, did these guys really write this? And then at the bottom, sometimes there's a link, or sometimes you just have to take in part of the paragraph and research for it. And then you'll find out that it was done by the Wall Street Journal originally, or something like that, or The Verge, who's maybe less litigious than the Wall Street Journal about what people reuse their stuff. And so this is already happening. The one thing about Channel One is they say they are going to give attribution. So I think it sounds like they're going to try to do it right. They're looking at these partnerships. I think it'll be good.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we hope they will. But Sports Illustrated said they were giving attribution, and we know how that went.
Well, yeah, but that was like they just created fake journalists, right?
Yeah.
Did we even talk about that last week?
I don't think we even touched on it. It's such a ridiculous story. It's cartoonish in its attempt to.
Yeah, the head of Sports Illustrated was actually fired afterwards because not only did they use AI like BuzzFeed and all these other organizations had done, they used AI to write stories, but they actually created personas, like fake people with pictures, with backstories, all these types of things, and then use those as their those were bylines. It was like, who are these people? Are these actual writers on staff? Well, the answer is no.
And they might have gotten away with it if they didn't keep switching up who wrote what in a way that made it very obvious.
It could have just been this like one person. Oh, no one ever sees that person.
Yeah.
They're a recluse. They just file stories. All right, so let's hit some more story. Here's from Woozy Rogers. I felt like I was reading an Onion article when I read that essay. That is totally true. It is totally funny. Okay, Stability AI brought out a image to 3D model, and they've been busy. Basically great. What you can do is you can take an image and it'll turn it into 3D. We've seen technologies out there that can take images and animate them or add movement. This one gives like a 3D perspective. And it's based on some work out of Columbia, mostly Columbia University researchers. And so there's a couple of things here with Stability. So first of all, I think they're getting back to their roots of visual. They've done adventures in LLMs for a while, which don't seem to be getting them much traction. And I think rightfully so, because all they're really doing is just fine-tuning someone else's model. In this case, again, they're sort of taking something that's out in the open source community and they're adding to it. They've retrained it. They've added more content. They've curated the content that's available, and they've put a wrapper around it. And so this is in research ability, or it's for researchers can use or personal use. People can do it, and I think it's just like that next thing. But I will also say that Stability AI, from what I can tell, doesn't ever create anything new. They haven't created their own foundation models. Everything, even Stable Diffusion, was based on some work out of a German university, the folks who created Lion, the image repository. So that's like another thing that I think is like super interesting about Stability. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, they basically take things that are out there and make them and make them better or more usable.
Yeah, I mean, they describe certain things as foundation models, but I agree. They're always like Stable LM is one they call foundation model, but it's also built out of other things. But I will say, as someone who had their mind blown when The Simpsons had a 3D computer generated segment, and they talked about how they spent millions of dollars and spent months modeling how a 2D character would look in 3D, and now it's a few minutes and a single image. It is an amazing accomplishment in that time scale.
Yeah, I think it's like this is super interesting. The LLMs are a much bigger market because they touch everything essentially. The image markets have been moving really well in terms of use and people paying for them. There's a kind of niche. Video, I think, is going to be super interesting. Obviously memes are going to be the first application, but there's so many things that are going to happen here. And again, it's around this using AI to do things that were hard to do in the past. Like it took people days or hours to do. Now you can do it in seconds. All right. So speaking of days or hours to do, Instagram.
Yep. Yeah.
They have a new background image editor.
Yeah. It's interesting because you can sort of see the philosophy behind what Instagram is doing, because they're very keen on people sharing pictures of themselves and what they're doing and their friends and so on. So instead of a full-on synthetic image creator, text image tool, it's specifically about backgrounds where the people stay the same, but you can change what's where they are, what they're doing. So it's more of a kind of a green screen after the fact.
Right.
Tool, and it's it's fun, and it's something that fits with Instagram's approach to social media, and obviously could build into other things. But for now, it fits with everything else they have: the stickers, the filters, and so on.
Well, it seems to me like one of the things I noticed with it is it looks like the quality is really good.
Yeah.
And that's really in keeping with Instagram's brand and image. What we saw previously with TikTok, they also created this sort of green screen like background that you could auto generate, but it wasn't this level of quality of realism, like placing you in a scene or setting. A lot of it was more abstract, kind of like the background we have here for this show, or just not as high fidelity.
Yeah, and there is sort of that the social element of sharing the, you have a synthetic background, but you can share it and other people can test it out and play with it. And I think that that's key. And I think, well, like a lot of what Meta does in terms of borrowing or trying to improve on existing ideas. I mean, Snapchat has been playing around with all kinds of synthetic image tools. And I think
Yes.
Meta and Instagram are hoping to have, if not as broad a tool, then at least a higher quality one, or claiming a higher quality one.
Got it. Okay, let's do a couple quick hitters here too in terms of other stories. So you wrote about Microsoft Copilot. They added a music engine.
Yeah, it's basically it's you want to use Copilot for making text, making images, and now you can make music. They're working with this company Suno, and you literally just describe a kind of song, and it will produce not only the lyrics but also the tune itself, and then you can actually play it. It's pretty cool.
And one of the things I thought was interesting there is that apparently there is like a DALL-E version of music that OpenAI has been working on, but a lot of people thought it would come out this year, and it hasn't. And you would think that Microsoft would be using whatever OpenAI is doing on this front. So the fact that they're using a third party either suggests that it's further delayed, or maybe they're not satisfied, or maybe OpenAI has decided not to focus on that.
Yeah, it will also be a timing thing. I mean, it's Microsoft may want to continue to be able to claim that there's no that Copilot can do everything that any other
Sure.
generative AI assistant can do, and also more.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so we have another Microsoft story. Boy, they created a in-car assistant with TomTom using generative AI.
Yeah, that was interesting. Working through Microsoft Azure, the OpenAI service, and TomTom, was a big name for a long time in the car navigation assistance, but now using OpenAI's LLMs, they're saying, now all of those car controls and the TomTom interface will react and understand language the way that ChatGPT does, in terms of asking for things without having to remember the exact command for controlling the car or the entertainment system.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got another story in this space. I think it was, I know what it was. It was Cerence and NVIDIA actually had something that they just released this week, using a large language model in the car again.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking earlier about specific domains and industries, and the automotive spaces has a lot of unique elements, which is one reason Cerence has been a big player in the voice AI and AI in cars space. It's why it spun off of Nuance originally. And now working with NVIDIA's LLM platform, they have the Cerence automotive large language model, Calm. And it basically, as I was saying, it's everything that Cerence could already do, plus a little more, plus being able to understand and interact with drivers on a much more casual conversational level, without the specific commands and having to remember vocabulary to control the vehicle and control the devices in the vehicle.
Well, and if you think about someone like Cerence, who's like invested for a long time in NLU based models, we also saw some recent news from SoundHound around these things as well, in terms of what they've been doing. Nuance, all these companies that are sort of wedded, Amazon, Google, wedded to these NLU based models that were not generative AI. They're all adding it. Now, whether they make the full switch over or how they determine between the two, but like, we are seeing a real-time technology platform transition in the AI space.
Yeah, and you're talking about having to pick a partner and sort of stick with it. It gets even more complicated when it comes to essentially computers on wheels like cars, and trying to figure out which one different car companies should pick, and whether to go for the one that seems more advanced now, or one that might be more useful in the future. I mean, Cerence has been very popular for a reason, and Cerence obviously does not want to fall behind and is working with NVIDIA to make sure it doesn't. But will that be enough, or will the TomTom and Microsoft's approach be more popular? It's hard to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, folks, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. I think this is the 44th edition. So we've done this almost every week this year, and we've done a couple of supplemental things. And so if you actually add the special events, we probably over 50 already this year. But we're here each week. We'll be back again in 2 weeks, and we just go through the news of the day, just like as a simple way. And like everyone can feel free to jump in and let us know they're here and make their own comments and questions. And we're going to do, after one more story, we're going to do winners and losers of the week. If you want to drop those in there in the chat as well. Happy to talk about who you think the winners and losers of the week are. Actually, the first week in January, we're going to do a year in review and a year ahead. So we're going to put those both together. So, look for that coming up in the first week in January. That'll be the week before CES, right? So it'll be lots to talk about. All right. So last story that I want to hit for today. We've got the former Pakistani Prime Minister, Imran Khan, addressed supporters from jail via a deepfake generative AI voice clone. So we're starting to see more of this generative AI out in the world. And this is a perfect example of it, how people are using these types of things. And one of the things we've always talked about is how the tools can help automate things, but in some ways they can help be there when you're not there. And this is a perfect example.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because we've seen a lot of either just generally benevolent or at least benign uses of in politics of voice clones and so on. But this is the first time it's ever been a subversive use of it, where the Pakistani former Prime Minister Imran Khan is not allowed to campaign, even though he is running for Prime Minister again from prison, and his supporters have used previous speeches of his to put together a voice clone, and then some notes that he got them on a speech that they fleshed out. And it's far from perfect, of course, because it's these things are not perfect at all, but it is an amazingly close recreation of a speech he might give in his own voice with his own intonations using 11 Labs, which is a very advanced example of this kind of technology. And I think we're going to be seeing it more and more. We're seeing other politicians using voice clones, either running for office or while in office, and for things like translating what they're saying and so on. But I think it's going to be a very different world when people talk about their campaign strategies, even just in the next year, let alone 5 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw like Deep Brain had the AI Yoon. So the is it president? I think it's the current president of South Korea actually had a virtual human version of himself called AI Yoon, and there was a voice clone and that type of thing. And he used that as part of his campaign. There's several U.S. politicians now who are using these types of things. I like this idea that you say it's sort of subversive because he's running for prime minister, but he's not. They put him in jail, so he's not allowed to run. So he's using it sort of. This is his way to get around the channel. And so I think it's like a really clever use of this.
It is either the first or one of the first examples of using this technology as to find a loophole in the law rather than either being irrelevant to the law or not. This is specifically something that
all loopholes will be closed eventually, my friend.
Yeah.
Hey, Woozy Rogers, thanks a lot for saying he stumbled onto us for the first time today and love it. He'll be back for sure. Thanks a lot, Woozy. We appreciate you saying that. Okay, let's finish up with winners and losers of the week. Who do you have for a loser this week?
Some of the stuff. I think I'm going to have to say Google, just because even though they have some good news coming out and so on, the fact that Gemini is being compared unfavorably to GPT 3.5 is, I think, going to be, if not as immediately embarrassing as Bard getting basic facts wrong, it's still not the look that they want going into 2024 and probably ramping up their competition with Microsoft.
Got it. And I'm going to do for my loser this week, and I absolutely, I think it's like there's a lot more to happen here. So we'll see what happens in January, February. Plus, I think we've heard about GPT 4.5 potentially coming out, GPT 5 in training right now. As soon as Google comes out with something that might look comparable or close, they're going to be behind again, I think. And I was just going to say that I skipped the story inadvertently, but I want to bring it back as my loser of the week. OpenAI grants board veto power, forms a generative AI safety advisory council. I think OpenAI is the loser this week because of this, but tell people about this story.
Yeah, so basically OpenAI put out a updated and expanded safety strategy. It's a pretty large document explaining how they measure and divide the different projects they're working on and how they want to make sure they're safe. And one of the ways that they're trying to improve safety is that the board of directors has more explicit power to either pause or outright stop development of projects that they feel are either dangerous or problematic in some way. It's a lot more explicit power for the board beyond just being able to fire Sam Altman. It's presumably now they'll be able to take lesser steps that are more focused on the actual problems rather than one person.
Yeah, fair enough. And I have no problem with the sentiment behind it. Like, I understand, but I think that this is going to create potentially additional concerns about enterprises that might be thinking about using OpenAI, and then whether they're going to have access to the models, what's going to happen, because you have this outside entity that might be making decisions that aren't necessarily business decisions, or maybe are not driven by business decisions, and maybe are not responsive to customer requests. Whereas you're going to go to Google or Anthropic and these type of people, and they might have some of the same things, but they'll have it's the same group of people making the decision about business interests and sort of other interests. So in some ways, I think you could say, hey, this is a big winner. But I think it's for OpenAI, it might be a loser in that a lot of people will not want to, or a lot of people will be more skeptical. And I'm already hearing about this, like people saying, hey, we need an alternative to OpenAI. They're looking more seriously at other models right now. They don't want to put all their eggs in the basket. And I think this is something that you could create some FUD around as a third party.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, winner.
I'm going to have to say people with creative ideas and not necessarily the training or talent to make it happen. I think of Instagram, and I think of the new music creation. I think there's a lot more opportunity for people who have ideas for art projects who maybe don't know how to write music or draw or paint or anything to be creative and come up with fun ideas. And I as someone who is very much in that camp, I'm excited to play around with all these new toys.
Absolutely. I'm going to say my winners are the researchers at Carnegie Mellon University. They did a great service to the industry, not just taking what the self-reported solution results are from these different benchmarks. They came in and said, hey, here's an independent evaluation. Here's what we found. And they actually, there's a couple things in there. It's not just about Google Gemini, but also Mistral's Mixtral LLM. They have some things in there. And actually the 3.5 turbo and the 4 turbo, those numbers are a little bit lower than you'll see elsewhere as well. So I think this third party independent evaluation, I think, is going to create a lot more sanity to what has been a research paper as press release driven industry this year.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. All right, folks. This has been amazing. Thanks everybody for joining us, and really look forward to having you in the new year. Come back. We're going to do a year in review, and we're going to do a look ahead next. That's would be in 2 weeks. Everyone have a great wrap of the weekend. Great holiday season. Thanks a lot, everyone.